the first time Tanner Dalton saw Willow Reynolds. She was kneeling in the dust outside the Bentonville General Store with a wounded sparrow cradled in her palms, and he knew right then that his life was about to change forever. It was late spring of 1878, and the Arkansas sun beat down mercilessly on the wooden storefronts lining the main street. Tanner had ridden into town to pick up supplies for the ranch where he worked, his shoulders aching from 3 weeks of breaking horses and mending fences. He was dusty, tired, and thinking of nothing but a cold beer and a hot meal when he saw her there, hunched over something small and fragile, her dark blonde hair falling loose from its pins. Most folks would have walked right past. Most folks had more pressing concerns than a tiny bird with a broken wing. But not this woman. She sat there in the dirt, her pale blue dress already stained with dust, completely absorbed in examining the creature's injury. Her fingers moved with such careful precision, such genuine tenderness, that Tanner found himself stopping in his tracks. "Madam," he said, his voice coming out rougher than he intended. "You need some help there." She looked up, and Tanner felt something shift in his chest. Her eyes were the color of honey in sunlight, warm and deep, with an intelligence that made him stand a little straighter. She couldn't have been more than 23 or 24, with a heart-shaped face dusted with freckles and a mouth that looked like it smiled often, though she wasn't smiling now. Now her brow was furrowed with concentration and concern. "I found him by the water trough," she said, gesturing with her chin toward the wooden structure at the end of the street. "I think he flew into something. His wing is damaged and he's in shock." Tanner dismounted and tied his horse to the hitching post before walking over. He crouched down beside her, close enough to see the delicate way she held the bird, supporting its body while keeping its wings immobilized. The sparrow should have been terrified, should have been struggling, but it lay still in her hands as if it somehow understood she meant to help. "You know about birds?" he asked. "I know about broken things," she replied quietly. "My father was a doctor back in Missouri before he passed. I learned some things from watching him work." Tanner studied her profile, the gentle curve of her jaw, the way her eyelashes cast shadows on her cheeks. "You have the kindest hands I have ever seen," he said, the words coming out before he could stop them. She turned to look at him fully then, and a faint blush crept up her neck. "That is very kind of you to say, Mr. Dalton, Tanner Dalton." He pulled off his hat, suddenly aware of how unkempt he must look after days on the range. "I work at the Davidson Ranch about 5 miles north of here." "Willow Reynolds," she said, and even her name sounded like something soft and natural, like wind through grass. "I have been in Bentonville for about 3 months now. I live with my Aunt Martha above the dress shop." "I would have remembered seeing you before," Tanner said, then realized how that sounded and cleared his throat. "What I mean is, you stand out, in a good way." She smiled then, just a small curve of her lips, but it was enough to make Tanner's heart beat a little faster. "I do not go out much," she admitted. "My aunt thinks a lady should be more concerned with needlework and social calls than wandering the streets looking for injured animals." "But you do it anyway." "I cannot help myself." She looked down at the bird again, her expression turning serious. "I need to splint this wing, but I do not have the right materials here. I was trying to figure out how to carry him home without causing more damage." Tanner considered for a moment, then reached into his saddlebag and pulled out a clean handkerchief. "Here, we can make a kind of sling with this, and I have some thin strips of leather that might work for a splint." Her eyes lit up with gratitude. "Would you really help me?" "Madam, I would be honored." They worked together in the dusty street, Tanner cutting thin strips from an old leather cord while Willow kept the bird calm and still. She instructed him on how to fashion a makeshift splint, explaining the anatomy of the wing in terms her father had taught her. Tanner found himself fascinated not just by her knowledge, but by the passion in her voice, the way she cared so deeply about this tiny creature that most people would not give a second glance. "There," she said finally, as they secured the splint with careful wraps of thin leather. "He needs rest and water. If he survives the night, he might have a chance. You are taking him home with you, of course. I cannot leave him out here." She looked up at Tanner with those honey-colored eyes. "Thank you for your help, Mr. Dalton. You have been very kind." "Tanner," he said. "Just Tanner, and it was no trouble at all." He hesitated, knowing he should let her go, should climb back on his horse and ride back to the ranch, but finding himself unwilling to let this moment end. "I come into town every Saturday for supplies. Maybe I could check on how your patient is doing." Willow's smile returned, warmer this time. "I would like that very much." She stood, cradling the bundled handkerchief with its precious cargo, and Tanner rose beside her. He was tall, well over 6 feet, and she barely came up to his shoulder, but somehow she did not seem small. There was a strength in her bearing that had nothing to do with size. "The dress shop on 3rd Street, she reminded him. "Above the storefront." "I will remember," Tanner promised. He watched her walk away, her skirts swaying slightly, her head bent protectively over the injured bird. Other people on the street gave her curious looks, but she paid them no mind. She had a purpose, a mission, and nothing else mattered. Tanner stood there longer than he should have, until she disappeared around the corner. Then he finally shook himself and went about his business, though he found his thoughts drifting back to her throughout the afternoon. The way she had looked at that bird with such compassion. The way her hands had moved with such sureness despite their gentleness. The way she had not laughed at him, or found him strange for wanting to help. The Davidson Ranch was a sprawling operation with several hundred head of cattle and more than a dozen horses. Tanner had been working there for 3 years, ever since he had drifted into Arkansas from Texas, looking for a fresh start after his parents had died of fever. He was 26 years old, good with horses and better with cattle, and he had saved nearly every penny he had earned with the vague notion that someday he might have a place of his own. But he had never met a woman who made him think seriously about the future, about what it might mean to build something permanent. Not until today. That night, lying in his bunk in the ranch hand's quarters, Tanner stared at the ceiling and thought about honey-colored eyes and gentle hands. He thought about the way Willow had not cared that her dress was getting dirty, had not worried about what people might think. She had seen something that needed help, and she had helped it. Simple as that. He fell asleep thinking about Saturday, still 5 days away. The week crawled by with agonizing slowness. Tanner threw himself into his work, helping to drive a herd to better pasture, repairing a section of fence that had been damaged in a storm, working with a particularly stubborn mare that old man Davidson wanted broken to saddle. But no matter how busy he kept himself, his thoughts kept returning to Willow. He found himself wondering if she was the marrying kind, if she had her eye on someone already. A woman like that, kind and smart and pretty, she probably had suitors lining up. What chance did a dusty ranch hand have? But then he remembered the way she had smiled at him, the way she had asked him to come back and check on the bird. That had to mean something, did it not? Saturday morning finally arrived, bright and clear. Tanner washed more carefully than usual, shaving close and putting on his best shirt, the blue one that had only a few patches. He polished his boots and even borrowed some hair tonic from one of the other hands, enduring the good-natured ribbing about being sweet on someone. "Must be quite a lady," said his friend Marcus, a grizzled cowboy who had been working ranches for 30 years. "I have not seen you this worked up over a woman before." "She is different," Tanner said simply. "They all are, son, they all are." But Marcus did not understand. Tanner had met plenty of women in his time, had even courted a few. But none of them had made him feel like this, like the ground had shifted beneath his feet and nothing would ever be quite the same again. He rode into Bentonville with his heart hammering against his ribs. The town was bustling with Saturday activity, farmers bringing in produce, families shopping for the week, children running between the shops with pennies clutched in their fists. Tanner navigated through the crowd until he found 3rd Street and the dress shop Willow had mentioned. It was a neat establishment with a painted sign reading "Martha's Fine Dresses and Alterations." Through the window, he could see bolts of fabric in various colors and a middle-aged woman helping a customer. That must be the aunt. Tanner tied up his horse and stood there for a moment, suddenly uncertain. What if Willow had just been being polite? What if she did not actually want to see him again? What if the bird had died and she was grieving and the last thing she wanted was some cowboy showing up on her doorstep? But he had not ridden all this way to turn coward now. He straightened his shoulders, climbed the external stairs that led to the apartment above the shop, and knocked on the door. There was a moment of silence, then footsteps. The door opened, and there was Willow, wearing a simple brown dress with her hair pinned up more neatly than it had been the week before. Her face broke into a genuine smile when she saw him. "Tanner, I was hoping you would come." The relief that flooded through him was almost dizzying. "I said I would. How is your patient? Come see for yourself." She led him into a small but tidy apartment. The main room served as both kitchen and sitting area, with a door leading off to what he assumed were the bedrooms. Everything was clean and carefully arranged, with lace curtains on the windows and a vase of wildflowers on the table. On a small table by the window sat a wooden crate lined with soft cloth. Inside, the sparrow hopped around on its good leg, the splinted wing held carefully against its body. When it saw Willow approach, it chirped eagerly. "He is eating," Willow said proudly, "and drinking water. I think he is going to make it." Tanner could not help but grin. "That is wonderful. You saved him." "We saved him," she corrected. "I could not have done it without your help." She glanced at him shyly. "Would you like some coffee? I just made a fresh pot." "I would love some." They sat at her small table, cups of strong coffee between them, and talked. Tanner learned that Willow had come to Bentonville after her father's death 6 months ago. She had no other family besides her Aunt Martha, and while she appreciated her aunt's generosity, she sometimes felt stifled by the woman's rigid views on proper behavior. "She means well," Willow said, wrapping her hands around her coffee cup. "But she thinks my interest in healing is unnatural for a woman. She says I should focus on finding a husband and keeping a proper home." "And what do you think?" Tanner asked. Willow looked at him directly, and he saw steel beneath the gentleness. "I think I can do both. I think I can be myself and still be a good wife if I find the right man. Someone who does not want to change me." "Any man who would want to change you would be a fool," Tanner said with feeling. She blushed again, but she held his gaze. "Tell me about you. How did you end up in Arkansas?" So he told her about growing up on a small ranch in Texas, about learning to ride before he could properly walk, about losing his parents and drifting north looking for work. He told her about the Davidson Ranch, about his dreams of maybe having his own place someday, nothing fancy but something that was his. "That sounds wonderful," Willow said softly. "Having something of your own, something you built yourself. What about you? What do you want?" She was quiet for a moment, looking out the window at the busy street below. "I want to help people," she said finally. "The way my father did. I know I cannot be a real doctor, not as a woman, but I could be a nurse or a midwife. I have been reading every medical book I can find, teaching myself. There is so much need out here, so many people who cannot afford proper care." Tanner felt something warm expand in his chest. She was not like other women he had known, worrying about social standing or pretty dresses. She wanted to make a difference, to use her gifts to help others. "That is admirable," he said. "My aunt thinks it is foolish." Willow's voice was tinged with frustration. "She says no respectable man would want a wife who spends her time tending to sick people and injured animals. Then those men do not deserve you." She looked at him with such gratitude that Tanner wanted to reach across the table and take her hand, but he restrained himself. It was too soon. He hardly knew her. But Lord, he wanted to know her, wanted to know everything about her. They talked for over an hour, the conversation flowing easily from one topic to another. Tanner found himself laughing more than he had in months, and Willow's eyes sparkled with humor and intelligence. Finally, reluctantly, he said he should go and let her get on with her day. "Will you come back next week?" she asked as she walked him to the door. "If you would like me to." "I would like that very much." Tanner left feeling like he was walking on air. The ride back to the ranch seemed to take no time at all, and he spent the rest of the day in a good mood that had the other ranch hands teasing him mercilessly. The following week, he returned, and the week after that. Each Saturday became precious, a few stolen hours with Willow that he treasured more than anything else. They released the sparrow together, once its wing had healed, standing in a small park at the edge of town and watching it take flight. Willow had tears in her eyes, and Tanner put his arm around her shoulders without thinking. She leaned into him, and he knew he was in trouble, the very best kind of trouble. Their courtship deepened slowly, respectfully. Tanner was always aware that Willow was a proper young lady, and he was just a ranch hand. He treated her with the utmost respect, never overstepping, never assuming. But the feelings between them grew stronger with each passing week. He learned that she loved raiding, that she had a sharp wit beneath her gentle demeanor, that she could be stubborn as a mule when she believed in something. She learned that he was patient and kind, that he had a way with animals, that beneath his quiet exterior was a man of deep feeling and strong principles. 2 months after their first meeting, Tanner worked up the courage to ask if he could court her properly. They were sitting on a bench in that same park, watching the summer sunset paint the sky in shades of gold and pink. "Willow, I know I am just a hired hand with not much to my name," he began, his heart pounding. "But I have feelings for you, strong feelings. And if you would allow it, I would like to court you with the intention of marriage someday." She turned to him, her eyes shining. "I was wondering when you would ask. So that is a yes." "That is a very definite yes, Tanner Dalton." He took her hand then, properly, threading his fingers through hers. It felt right, like two pieces fitting together. "I cannot promise you riches or an easy life," he said seriously. "But I can promise I will work hard and do everything in my power to make you happy. And I will never ask you to be anything but yourself." "That is all I need," she whispered. He wanted to kiss her then, wanted it so badly he ached with it, but not here in public where anyone could see. So instead, he lifted her hand to his lips and kissed her knuckles gently, and the look in her eyes told him she understood exactly what he was feeling. The next few months were some of the happiest of Tanner's life. He spent every spare moment with Willow and she with him. Her Aunt Martha was not entirely pleased about the match, thinking Willow could do better than a cowboy, but she could not deny that Tanner was respectful and hardworking, and clearly devoted to her niece. Willow continued her studies in medicine, and Tanner encouraged her every step of the way. When old Mrs. Henderson down the street took ill, Willow nursed her back to health with such skill that word began to spread. People started coming to her for help with minor ailments and injuries. She never charged much, just enough to buy more supplies, and she treated everyone with the same kindness she had shown that wounded sparrow. Tanner was proud of her, proud to be with a woman who had such compassion and skill. He began saving even more of his wages, planning for a future that now seemed bright and possible. In the autumn of 1878, when the leaves were turning gold and red, and the air had that crisp edge that promised winter, Tanner went to speak with Mr. Davidson about buying a small parcel of land on the edge of the ranch property. It was not much, maybe 20 acres with a creek running through it, but it was enough for a modest house and maybe a few horses. Mr. Davidson, who had grown fond of Tanner over the years, offered him a fair price and even helped him draw up the papers. "You are doing this for that young lady in town, are you not?" the old man asked with a knowing smile. "Yes, sir, if she will have me." "Any woman would be lucky to have you, son. You are one of the best men I have ever employed. Honest, hard-working, good-hearted. Do not sell yourself short." Those words meant more to Tanner than he could express. He had spent so long thinking of himself as just a drifter, someone without roots or prospects. But maybe he was more than that. Maybe he could be the kind of man who deserved someone like Willow. He bought a ring from the jeweler in town, a simple gold band with a small garnet stone, the only one he could afford. It was not fancy, but it was honest, and he hoped Willow would see it that way. On a Saturday in late October, Tanner asked Willow to take a walk with him outside of town. The day was beautiful, cool but sunny, and she agreed happily. He borrowed a wagon from the ranch and drove them out to the property he had bought. "Where are we going?" she asked, curiosity bright in her eyes. "You will see." When they arrived at the land, Tanner helped her down from the wagon and led her to a spot overlooking the creek. The water burbled peacefully over smooth stones, and cottonwood trees grew along the banks, their leaves bright yellow in the afternoon sun. "What do you think of this place?" he asked, watching her face carefully. Willow looked around, taking in the gentle roll of the land, the clear water, the distant view of the mountains. "It is beautiful," she said, "peaceful. It is mine, ours if you want it." She turned to him, her lips parted in surprise. "What?" Tanner took her hands in his heart beating so hard he was sure she could hear it. "Willow Reynolds, I know we have not been courting very long, but I have never been more certain of anything in my life. I love you. I love your kindness and your strength and your stubborn determination to help everyone who needs it. I love the way you see the good in people and creatures others overlook. I love everything about you." He dropped to one knee, still holding her hands, and saw tears begin to gather in her eyes. "I bought this land so I could build us a home. Nothing fancy, but somewhere we could be ourselves, somewhere you could help people without anyone telling you it is not proper. I have been saving money, and I can hire help to build a house by spring. Willow, will you marry me?" She was crying now, but smiling through the tears. "Yes," she said, her voice breaking. "Yes, Tanner, of course I will marry you." He stood and pulled the ring from his pocket, sliding it onto her finger with hands that trembled slightly. Then, finally, he kissed her. It was their first kiss, soft and sweet and full of promise, and Tanner felt like his heart might burst from happiness. When they finally pulled apart, Willow laughed and wiped at her eyes. "I cannot believe you bought land. I cannot believe we are going to have our own place." "We can build the house however you want it," Tanner said eagerly. "With a room you can use for treating patients if you like, and maybe a barn for horses. I am thinking I could start breeding and training them, make a living that way." "That sounds perfect." She touched his face gently, wonderingly. "You really do not mind about my healing, mind? Willow, it is part of who you are. I would never want you to give that up. The world needs people like you." She kissed him again, and Tanner thought he might be the luckiest man alive. They were married in December, a small ceremony in the Bentonville church with Aunt Martha, the Davidson family, and a few friends in attendance. Willow wore a simple white dress she had sewn herself, and Tanner wore his best suit, purchased especially for the occasion. When they exchanged vows, his voice was strong and sure, and hers was soft but steady. The first few months of married life were spent living in a small rented house in town while their home was being built. Tanner worked at the ranch during the week and spent weekends working on their property with hired help. Willow continued treating patients and helped with the construction when she could, insisting on having input on every aspect of their home. They argued sometimes, as all couples do, usually about money or how much work Tanner was taking on. But they always talked it through, always found their way back to the love that had brought them together. By spring of 1879, the house was finished. It was small but well built, with 2 bedrooms, a kitchen, a sitting room, and a separate room that Willow could use as a clinic. There was a barn for the horses Tanner planned to work with, and a chicken coop that Willow insisted on because she wanted fresh eggs. The day they moved in, Tanner carried Willow over the threshold, both of them laughing like children. They spent their first night in their new home lying in bed and listening to the sounds of the creek outside, to the wind in the cottonwoods, to the absolute peace of having a place that was entirely theirs. "Are you happy?" Tanner asked, pulling her close. "Happier than I ever imagined I could be," Willow said. "Thank you for building this life with me." "Thank you for taking a chance on a dusty cowboy," he replied. She turned in his arms to face him, her eyes serious. "You have never been just a cowboy to me, Tanner. From that very first day when you stopped to help with that bird, I knew you were someone special. You have the kindest heart I have ever known." He kissed her then, long and deep, and they made love in their own bed in their own house, and everything felt exactly right. The years that followed were not always easy, but they were good. Tanner built a reputation as an excellent horse trainer, and people came from all over the county to buy his animals. Willow became the unofficial doctor for the area, treating everything from broken bones to difficult births. The people she helped often paid in goods rather than money, which was fine with both of them. Their root cellar was always full, and they never went hungry. They lost their first baby, a miscarriage in the winter of 1880 that devastated them both. Willow blamed herself, thinking she had worked too hard, but Tanner held her through the grief and reminded her that some things were beyond anyone's control. They mourned together, and their bond deepened through the shared pain. In 1881, Willow became pregnant again. This time, she was more careful, and Tanner was almost comically protective, barely letting her lift anything heavier than a teacup. Their son was born in March of 1882, a healthy baby with Tanner's dark hair and Willow's honey-colored eyes. They named him James after Willow's father. Becoming parents changed them in ways both profound and practical. Tanner found himself working even harder, driven by the need to provide for his family. Willow learned to balance motherhood with her healing work, often treating patients with baby James strapped to her back. 2 years later, their daughter was born, a fierce little thing with lungs that could wake the dead. They named her Ruth, and she had her mother's stubborn streak from the very beginning. Life settled into a rhythm. Tanner worked with the horses. Willow tended to her patients and their children, and they built a community around themselves. Their home became a gathering place for neighbors, a place where people knew they would be welcomed and helped if they needed it. Bentonville was growing, slowly transforming from a rough frontier town into something more established. A real doctor eventually came to town, a man named Dr. Phillips who had trained back east. Instead of feeling threatened, Willow was thrilled. She and Dr. Phillips formed a partnership of sorts. with him handling the more complex cases and her continuing to provide care for those who could not afford his fees or who lived too far out to come into town. On their 10th wedding anniversary in 1888, Tanner took Willow back to the spot where he had proposed. The children were with Aunt Martha for the weekend, giving them a rare moment alone. They stood by the creek, older now, with lines on their faces and calluses on their hands, but still very much in love. "You remember that day I found you with that sparrow?" Tanner asked, pulling her close. "How could I forget? It changed my whole life." "Mine too. Sometimes I think about what would have happened if I had just ridden past, if I had not stopped to talk to you." Willow shook her head. "I think we were always meant to find each other. Maybe not that exact day, but somehow. Some people are just meant to be together." "You really believe that?" "I do. Do you know what I thought the first time you spoke to me?" "What?" "I thought your voice sounded like home, even though I had never heard it before. And when you said that about my hands, I knew you saw me, the real me. Not what I should be or what people expected, but who I actually was." Tanner kissed her forehead, her cheeks, her lips. "I will always see you, Willow. Always." They made love that evening in their own bed, tender and passionate, their bodies familiar but never boring. Afterward, lying tangled together in the sheets, Willow told him she was pregnant again. Tanner's eyes widened. "Again? Are you sure?" "I am sure. Are you happy?" "Happy. Willow, I am thrilled." He placed his hand on her still flat belly. "We make beautiful babies together," she laughed. "We do we not?" Their third child, another boy, was born in the spring of 1889. They named him Thomas, and he was the most easy-going of their children, happy to watch the world go by with wide, curious eyes. As the years passed, Tanner and Willow grew into themselves, into their partnership, into the life they had built together. They faced challenges, droughts that killed the grass and made it hard to keep the horses fed, illnesses that Willow fought with every bit of knowledge she possessed, the death of Aunt Martha in 1891, which hit them both hard despite her initial disapproval of their marriage. But they also experienced deep joys. James's first time breaking a horse by himself, under Tanner's watchful eye. Ruth learning to read and devouring every book she could get her hands on. Thomas bringing home injured animals for his mother to heal, just as she had healed that sparrow so many years ago. In 1895, when Tanner was 43 and Willow was 41, they were sitting on their porch one evening watching the sun set. The children were inside doing their homework, and the sounds of the horses in the barn drifted through the warm summer air. "You ever think about how different life might have been?" Willow asked, her hand in his. "Different how?" "If you had not stopped that day. If I had not been nursing that bird. If any number of things had gone differently." Tanner considered this. "Sometimes," he admitted. "But then I realize I cannot imagine any life but this one. You, the children, this place we built. This is everything I never knew I wanted." "That is exactly how I feel." She leaned her head on his shoulder. "Sometimes I treat a patient, someone in pain or frightened, and I remember how my father used to say that healing was about more than just mending bodies. It was about seeing people's suffering and meeting it with compassion. You taught me that in a way." "Me? How?" "That day with the sparrow, you did not have to stop, you did not have to help. But you saw something small and broken and you thought it was worth your time. You saw me covered in dust and caring about something most people would think was foolish, and you did not laugh. You understood." Tanner pulled her closer. "I fell in love with you that day, you know, right there in the street. I thought I was losing my mind, falling for someone I had just met, but I could not help it." "I fell for you too," Willow confessed. "When you said that about my hands, I felt like you were seeing straight into my soul. No one had ever looked at me like that before." "I will look at you like that until the day I die," Tanner promised, and he kept that promise. As they grew older, as their children grew up and started lives of their own, as Bentonville transformed from a frontier town into a modern city with electric lights and telephones, Tanner and Willow remained devoted to each other. James took over the horse breeding business, showing even more skill than his father. Ruth became a teacher, her love of learning transforming into a passion for education. Thomas followed in his mother's footsteps, studying to become a real doctor with her encouragement and support. In 1905, Tanner and Willow became grandparents for the first time when James and his wife had a daughter. Holding that tiny baby in her arms, Willow cried with happiness, and Tanner stood beside her with his arm around her waist, marveling at how their love had created this expanding circle of family. They never became wealthy, never achieved the kind of success that people wrote about in newspapers. But they built something better, a life rich in love and purpose and connection. Their home remained a place where people came when they needed help, where no one was ever turned away. On their 30th wedding anniversary in 1908, their children threw them a party. The house was full of people, friends and family and former patients, who had come to celebrate the couple who had given so much to the community. There were speeches and toasts, laughter and music, and through it all, Tanner and Willow stood together, their hands clasped, their eyes meeting with the same warmth they had shared 3 decades before. Late that night, after everyone had gone home and the children had left them in peace, Tanner and Willow sat on their porch as they had done countless times before. The stars were brilliant overhead, and the creek sang its eternal song. 30 years, Willow said softly. It does not seem possible. 30 years since you made me the happiest man alive. She turned to look at him, really look at him. His hair was gray now, his face lined with years of sun and wind and work. But his eyes were the same, warm and kind and full of love. "Do you remember what you said to me that first day?" she asked. "About my hands. I said you had the kindest hands I had ever seen, and I meant it. Your hands are pretty kind too, Tanner Dalton. They have built this house, raised our children, held me through every storm. They have healed in their own way just as much as mine." He raised her hand to his lips and kissed it, the same gesture he had made when he first asked to court her. "We have had a good life, have we not?" "The best life," she agreed. "Better than I ever dreamed possible." They sat in comfortable silence, watching the stars wheel slowly overhead, listening to the sounds of the land they loved. Somewhere in the barn, a horse nickered softly. An owl called from the cottonwoods. The world turned steady and sure, and they turned with it. As they grew older still, into their 60s and then their 70s, their love only deepened. They moved a bit slower, worked a bit less, but their essential selves remained unchanged. Willow still treated patients who came to her door, though Thomas handled most of the medical work now. Tanner still worked with the horses, though James did the heavy lifting. They still sat on their porch every evening and watched the sun set. They accumulated more grandchildren, and then great-grandchildren, each one a miracle, each one carrying forward the legacy of love and kindness that Tanner and Willow had built their lives upon. In the winter of 1919, Willow fell ill with pneumonia. She was 75 years old, and though she fought with every bit of strength she possessed, her body was tired. Tanner sat by her bedside day and night, holding her hand, talking to her, reading to her from the medical books she still loved even though she could no longer practice. One afternoon, as pale winter sunlight filtered through the window, Willow opened her eyes and smiled at him. "Do you remember the sparrow?" she asked, her voice weak but clear. "I will never forget it," Tanner said, tears running down his weathered face. "We saved him together." just like we saved each other. You saved me, Willow. You gave my life meaning. She squeezed his hand with what strength she had left. We saved each other, she insisted. And we built something beautiful. Our children, our grandchildren, all the people we helped. That is our legacy, Tanner. Love and kindness passed down. I do not want to let you go, he whispered. I know. But you have to eventually. We both knew this day would come. She touched his face gently, her fingers still capable of infinite tenderness despite their weakness. Thank you for seeing me, for all of it. For everything. Thank you for stopping in that dusty street and caring about a broken bird. Thank you for saying yes. Thank you for every single day we have had together. Willow closed her eyes, smiling peacefully. The kindest hands I have ever known, she murmured. You and me both. She died that evening, peacefully, with Tanner holding her hand and their children surrounding them. The grief was immense, a physical weight on Tanner's chest, but it was joined by gratitude for the 41 years they had shared, for the life they had built together. Tanner lived another 3 years, watched over lovingly by his children and grandchildren. He spent his days on the porch, watching the land they had claimed together, remembering. The house was never empty. There was always someone there, a grandchild learning to ride, a great-grandchild bringing him flowers, Ruth reading to him, James discussing the horses, Thomas checking his health. On a spring morning in 1922, when the cottonwoods were leafing out and the creek was running high with snowmelt, Tanner Dalton died in his sleep in the bed he had shared with Willow. He was 80 years old, and according to those who found him, he had a smile on his face. They buried him next to Willow on a hillside overlooking their land. At the funeral, Thomas spoke about his parents' love story, about two people who had found each other through an act of simple kindness and built a life on that foundation. He spoke about the thousands of people his mother had treated, the hundreds of horses his father had trained. But mostly, he spoke about the love that had sustained them through everything. My father used to say that my mother had the kindest hands he had ever seen, Thomas said, his voice breaking slightly. And she did. But so did he. They taught us all that kindness is not weakness, it is strength. It is the thing that binds us together, that makes us human, that gives life meaning. Years later, long after everyone who had known Tanner and Willow personally had passed on, their story was still told in Bentonville. The house they built still stood, passed down through generations of their family. People still talked about the cowboy and the woman with the kind hands, about how a wounded sparrow had brought them together, about the love that had sustained them through decades. Their great-great-grandchildren grew up hearing the story, learning that love could be simple and profound at once, that kindness mattered, that a single moment of compassion could change everything. They learned that the best lives were not necessarily the most famous or the most wealthy, but the ones filled with love and purpose and connection. And sometimes, on spring mornings when the light hit just right, people swore they could see two figures sitting on the porch of that old house, holding hands and watching the sunrise, together as they had always been and would always be. The legacy of Tanner and Willow lived on in every act of kindness their descendants performed, in every hand extended to help. In every moment, someone chose compassion over indifference. Their love story became woven into the fabric of Bentonville itself, a reminder that the most extraordinary things often begin with the simplest acts: a wounded bird, a dusty street, two people who saw in each other something worth cherishing, and a love that lasted beyond lifetimes, teaching everyone who heard the story that kindness, compassion, and love were the things that truly mattered, the things that endured when everything else faded away. In the end, that was their gift to the world, proof that a single moment of connection could blossom into a lifetime of love, and that the smallest act of mercy could change not just two lives, but generations to come. They had found each other through gentleness, built their life on respect and partnership, and left behind a legacy that would never be forgotten. The cowboy had been right that first day. Willow did have the kindest hands he had ever seen. And together, those kind hands had built something beautiful, something lasting, something that proved love was always worth choosing, always worth fighting for, always worth everything. Their story ended, as all stories must, but the love they shared lived on forever in the hearts of those who came after them. A bright flame passed from generation to generation, warming everyone it touched. And perhaps that is the only immortality that really matters. Not being remembered for grand achievements or accumulating wealth, but being remembered for how you loved, how you treated others, and what you built together with the person who saw your truest self and loved you for it. Tanner and Willow had found that with each other, and in doing so, they had found everything.